Well, after all that talk about skipping Joseph and trying to figure out who was next, we forgot about Joshua and Josiah. So those are the two that fit in between, I guess, Joseph and Judah, as far as who we're going to look at least. But I couldn't believe with Joshua. It should have been obvious. Pretty big player in the Old Testament narrative. Who we're looking at today covers quite a bit of text, but I sort of highlighted some things to point out about him through his life. He's called in this book the man who was a soldier saint, meaning, I guess, he was a soldier and a saint at the same time. His name means Jehovah is salvation. Joshua, or Yeshua, which, by the way, happens to have been Jesus' name, his actual name that his parents gave him. Yeshua, not Jesus, but remember we've talked about that. Who was Joshua? Joshua was Moses' right-hand man. I worded this. One of two of the 12 spies who came back with a faithful report. He was chosen by Moses to lead military campaigns and appointed as his successor, who would finally lead the Hebrews not only into the Promised Land, but also to take possession of it and divide it among them. So that's who Joshua was. That's his legacy. We meet him very abruptly. If you're reading through the Bible at any point, and you get to Exodus chapter 17, all of a sudden you meet Joshua. And it sounds like this. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, so Moses said to Joshua, choose for us men and go out and fight with Amalek. That's how it starts. Never even heard of Joshua before. Just all of a sudden, there he is. Which pretty much leads us to understand he's been there. He was already there. What capacity he had, we don't know exactly. Probably the same capacity he had from that point on. But we meet him as a soldier. A leader of soldiers, actually. So here he pops up, and he is told by Moses to go fight Amalek. So he does. He does that successfully. But he's said to be the son of Nun. It's his dad's name. N-U-N. He's from the tribe of Ephraim. We know absolutely nothing about his mom. Not a word. But we can probably make some speculation as to what kind of woman his mom was, based on what kind of man he was. No discredit to his father, but his mom probably was of the same sort, even though we have no idea who she was or anything about her. So, as we're introduced to Joshua, we see him being commissioned to lead this military battle, which he does successfully and faithfully. He's called several times Moses' assistant in the ESV. And I think the older versions use the word minister, which just means servant. He was Moses' servant. He was Moses' assistant, Moses' sidekick. That's why I called him his right-hand man, because that's what he seems to be. He was Moses' go-to man. And so, not just being a military leader, he starts being referred to as Moses' assistant. Let's see. In Exodus 24, verse 13, Moses rose with his assistant Joshua. And Moses went up into the mountain of God, so on and so forth. In chapter 33 then again, in verse 11, thus Jehovah used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So he, in multiple other places, at least two other places, he's called Moses' assistant. That makes him pretty important, because Moses was a very, very important character as being the one that God called to deliver the people from Egypt. So he's Moses' assistant. There's one occasion, and here's the thing. Anything that Moses was going through from at least Exodus 17 onward, Joshua was going through, because Joshua was right there. And he wasn't a leader per se. I mean, not a leader in the sense of, we never see him lumped in with Moses when the people start getting angry. It's always Aaron, Moses and Aaron and what they've done. We never see Joshua thrown in with them, but he was he's right up there with them. I mean, he's in sort of Moses' inner circle, if you will. But he was being prepped to be a leader. But on one occasion, he gets jealous. But he doesn't get jealous for himself. It's very similar to what John the Apostle, on one occasion, John the Apostle sees some people casting out demons. And we're not told about when it happens. We only know about it because John said it. John told on himself. And he said, we saw these people casting out demons in your name, and we told them to stop. Right? And Jesus, if you want to call it a rebuke, I guess it was very, very, very gentle rebuke, said, don't do that. That's a very loose paraphrase. If he's not against you, he's for you. Well, Joshua sees some people prophesying, some men prophesying, and he gets jealous, but not on his own behalf. He gets jealous for Moses. He's defensive for Moses because Moses is the one. Moses is the leader. He's the one that's supposed to be, that the people are supposed to be listening to. He's the one, we just read that verse, an amazingly powerful verse. God used to speak to Moses as with a face-to-face, as with a friend. Well, Joshua gets jealous. And by the way, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Joshua, unless I'm forgetting something, is one of those very few elite people who is never rebuked in Scripture. Nothing that he does. This is this is as close as it gets when he gets defensive for Moses. So it tells us something about Joshua's character, his zeal and his devotion, but it was still misguided, I guess, to an extent. So he says, let's see, it's Numbers 11, verse 26. Starting in verse 26. 2 men remained in the camp, one named Eldad, the other named Medad, and the Spirit rested on them. They were among those registered, but they had not gone out to the tent, so they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the assistant of Moses from his youth, said, my Lord Moses, stop them. Make them stop. Yeah, Joe?
Well, the word I would use for Joshua is loyal.
Yeah, loyal.
It's not a word that we hear much in our culture. We sing the song, to Christ the Lord, be loyal. And I think of people who are loyal to schools or whatever. You pledge allegiance to that. Regardless as to what happens, you follow that person. And I think that's what Joshua did with Moses.
Yeah.
He was a loyal soldier.
He truly understood and believed Moses to be exactly who he was, God's spokesman, really. And this was a rare situation because these 70 elders, the Spirit fell on these 70 elders that were going to help Moses, and they prophesied. But verse 25 says they didn't keep doing it. It was just sort of a one and done kind of ordeal here. But then there were those 2 men. It's kind of a mysterious circumstances in itself. These 2 men weren't there. They were in the camp prophesying. Joshua didn't understand, I guess, what was going on, if any of them did. But so his initial gut reaction was, Moses, make this stop. This is not good. But Moses understood that he was jealous for him. He was jealous on his behalf because he was loyal, like he said. He was very loyal to Moses. After all, we're told here, he had been his assistant from his youth. We were already told that he was a young man earlier in that one spot. But apparently from a relatively young age, he had been Moses. If Moses was a knight, he would have been his squire. That's the kind of thing. He was his helper, his assistant from his youth. So Moses shows his humility. Moses himself said that Moses was the meekest man on the earth. Kind of interesting. Well, he proves it here. He says, "Are you jealous for my sake? Would that all Jehovah's people were prophets, that Jehovah would put his spirit on them." So he kind of, it's not really a rebuke, but he's just saying, he's teaching Joshua, saying, I wish every single one of the people was doing what those two guys are doing. And that, in other words, Moses is saying, it's not one of my aspirations to be the only one that God speaks to, and I'm the only one that has the words that God wants for the people. I wish he would give it to everybody. Humility there. But it still says something about Joshua's character that, he was fervent, he was zealous, he cared. He was dedicated, even if, in this instance his motives were just a little bit misguided. Sincerely, just not seeing maybe the bigger picture. All he saw was, these guys are out there prophesying, but it's supposed to be you, sir. But the next thing we see Joshua doing is being chosen as one of the spies. So they finally get to Canaan. It didn't take long for them to actually get to Canaan, relatively speaking. From Egypt to the border of Canaan. Didn't take that long. I don't remember the exact time, but I want to say, I will hesitantly say from memory, that I think it was like a couple of weeks, maybe. That's all it took. The only reason that they didn't go in until 40 years later was because they were being punished. They got to the land within a couple of weeks. And they decided they're going to send some spies in there. Joshua was one of those spies. Caleb was another one. Kudos to anybody who can name even one of the other 10. Their names are given, but nobody remembers them for good reason. By the way, he's not called Joshua in that. Another one of his names was Hoshea. Very similar. Which is also the same name as Hosea, by the way. So Joshua, Hoshea, Hosea, and Jesus, eventually. Those are all the same name. But they go into the land. We all know how this goes. They come back. The 10 spies say, this is insane. It's ridiculous. I can't believe, what's God thinking? That we're going to go in there? There's giants over there. But it was Caleb and Joshua who tried to set it straight and stood up against the 10 to give a faithful report, defended God, encouraged the people. Actually, Caleb is more credited with it than Joshua even in chapter 13 of Numbers. Caleb's the one who spoke up. He was probably older than Joshua. Was older than Joshua. But then in chapter 14, Joshua speaks up with Caleb. They give this amazing speech. Very much like Jonathan with his armor bearer. If God delights in us, he'll help us. He's going to do this. He's going to lead us here. He promised. And then all of a sudden, they said, we need to kill these guys. We've got to kill them right now. They're going to get us killed. We need to kill them before they kill us. That had to be tough to deal with that. so frustrated. He was already frustrated with those two men that were prophesying because he was jealous for Moses. Now he's like, God, who has proven himself over and over, has promised us he's going to take us there and give us this land and give them into our hand. But these people are just so stupid and faithless and who knows, whatever else, spineless. In fact, they weren't spineless. They were just, their spines were strong for all the wrong reasons. They were stiff-necked. They were stubborn for bad reasons, and not the good things that stubbornness can occasionally benefit somebody. Why don't they just believe in God and what he has said? I don't know what you would do in that situation if you were Joshua. We know what Moses had to deal with this. Again, Joshua would have been right there seeing what Moses was having to go through. It just doesn't lend itself to help somebody have much patience and understanding for those people, does it? When you're seeing your master, or whatever you want to call him, your leader, get beat down and beat down and beat down in spirit with these people, when all he's trying to do is lead them to the promised land. Now he's fighting it up against it firsthand with these 10 spies. He probably wanted to take those other 10 and slap them all, beat them up. I can't believe you would come here and tell the people this. You caused all this. And even when they try to sort it out, now they're like, let's stone them with stones. And obviously they mourned pretty severely. But as a result of this, they were the only two of that generation, I guess, in that age group. They were the only two exceptions. Even Moses didn't get to go in because of what he did. Only Joshua and Caleb. Aaron didn't get to go. Moses didn't get to go. Joshua and Caleb were the only two who were allowed to go in. Everybody else either died in the wilderness, or as Moses died, on the mountain there, according to God's will. As we go on then in Numbers, Joshua is called by God. He's called a man in whom is the Spirit, capital S. Numbers 27, verse 18. Jehovah said to Moses, "Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit." And this is him being appointed as Moses' successor. Of all the ones, anybody else in the whole land, Joshua is to be the one who's going to take your place. Now, it's possible. It's not within the realm of impossibility that Joshua could have been chosen as Moses' sidekick and yet not risen to the point of being his successor. That could have happened. If Joshua had shown himself to not be fit for it, just because he was Moses' assistant from his youth doesn't mean he would eventually rise up to be fit for being his successor. But he was. He did rise. He was. And as we see it, he was the perfect choice. He executed his commission faithfully, valiantly, courageously. God knew what he was doing when he chose Joshua to take Moses' place, which is, you talk about big shoes to fill. Got to take Moses' place? I'm not sure if there is any other position in the Old or New Testament where bigger shoes had to be filled than Joshua having to fill Moses' shoes. Because I guess maybe Elisha and Elijah might maybe come close, but still, Moses. I think Moses' shoes were a little bigger as far as that goes, in what Joshua was going to need to do. Not to mention the fact that the people didn't really have a great relationship with Moses, so he's going to take his place. So now I'm going to have to inherit all the grief that he had to put up with, but he did it. So there in that same chapter 27, he's chosen as Moses' successor. he is said by God to be one of the only ones who have wholly, with a W and two L's, wholly followed Jehovah. That's Numbers 32, verse 12. Verse 11. No, it is verse 12. Verse 11 has the negative. They haven't followed. None except Caleb and Joshua, for they have wholly followed Jehovah. So Joshua and Caleb, only two of that generation who wholly followed Jehovah. That's God himself saying that. Then he was also chosen by God as a conqueror and the divider of the promised land, chapter 34, and then going into Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 34, he is said to be a man who is full of the Spirit and wisdom. So all this sort of just put pieces together, a puzzle of who Joshua is. And really, to see everything, we'd have to study Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and Joshua to see it, because that's all Joshua. Joshua's there in Exodus and Numbers. He's not the forefront, Moses is, but all of Joshua, Moses is dead. So the book of Joshua is all under the leadership of Joshua, and we can learn so much from him and his dealings in the book of Joshua. Summing up the book of Joshua, he courageously and faithfully led the people after Moses. He hardly at all, he rarely stepped aside in the wrong, put a foot wrong the whole time. There was an instance of failure in chapter 7, if you remember, at Ai. Remember what happened at Ai? Right after Jericho? Before the waters? Okay. So Jericho, first fruits, right? They just crossed the river. The infamous, you will circle the city, so on. How'd that go? Success or failure? Big success. They did it. Exactly. But they were told not to take anything. Because it was the first fruits, God said, destroy it all. Now, Ai is the next town over. City over, I should say. They're going to start over again. Here we go again. We're taking Ai. We took Jericho. We're on it. We're off to a good start. They go to Ai. Whole thing falls apart. Horribly. Goes wrong. They lose. Joshua is absolutely devastated. Has no clue what's going on. He tears his clothes. Falls on his face. He starts to question, why did you bring us here? To make us die. And by the way, totally different attitude than what the people, that sounds a lot like what the people said, doesn't it? Why did Jehovah bring us here to kill us in the wilderness? Totally different than what Joshua interpreted this as God's doing. So he's saying, if this was your will, then, why all this other stuff? This doesn't make sense. So God basically tells him, what are you crying for? Get up. There's sin in the camp. So guess what Joshua did? He got up and he put on his detective badge. He started finding out what in the world's going on. And he did. Joshua rose early in the morning. That's a repeated phrase that alone is not just a historical detail. It says something about Joshua as a person. He is, again, diligent. He wants to get things done. He rose early in the morning. Verse 16 says it again in chapter 8, verse 10. I don't think those are the only two times either. But figures it out, and he deals with it the way it had to be dealt with. Not that it, thrilled him to death to have to do that, but he knew it had to be done. So he took care of it. But just how devastated he was, and probably just as devastated when he found out that the people that the man Achan had done that. But he handled it wisely and effectively. And speaking of which, one of the biggest worries of Joshua, you remember how he was jealous for Moses. It's a similar mindset that he had in this case. When they fell at Ai, he wasn't thinking, "Oh, I'm a failure as a leader." He said, "What will you do for your great name?" to God. That's where his mind was. Look at what this might lead people to believe about you. That you lost? You can't lose. So that's where Joshua's head was at. He was worried about God's name. What will you do for your name? But anyway, so then we already saw that. He corrected it and dealt with it. In chapter 9, those sneaky, nasty Gibeonites, remember what they did? One of the most elaborate, extensive pranks, if you want to call it a prank, ever, imaginable, because they saw that these people were coming through and taking over everything. So they very elaborately tore up their clothes in a way, they made them look very old and beat up. Not just ripped it, but they went through great pains to basically trick the Israelites into thinking that they had come from a far country because of a loophole that they wouldn't kill them if they had come, if they weren't part of that land. And it worked. Joshua fell for it. He made peace with them. He made a covenant with them. Well, after this is found out, guess what Joshua does? Well, he doesn't take it all back and say, I made this agreement under, false pretenses or whatever. It's all null and void. He actually, very wisely and faithfully to his own word, handles it. So he says, we have sworn by Jehovah. And so now we can't touch them. So instead, he says, let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore. So instead of that, he made them, verse 27 says, he made them basically servants, workers of the Israelites, for the Israelites, cutters of wood, drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of Jehovah. And at that point, to this day, he says, that was what's done. But, that again says something about his character. He was a man of integrity. If it was me, I would have said, no way. You lied, you tricked us, so any covenant I made with you is null, it's void. But Joshua said, we swore an oath. That's that. No matter what he wanted to do, he did the right thing. Yep.
And those the people that Saul tried to annihilate, and David had to give them 7 or 70 or something of Saul's.
I can't remember. The Gibeonites? Or the people of... I don't recall. Let's see. 2 Samuel 21, perhaps. Whoops. The Gibeonites do reappear. But I'm not sure. Very well may be. Saul definitely had something to do with some sort of situation. Blood guilt. Saul put them to death. He killed them.
David had atoned for it by giving some of Saul's descendants to these people.
That's what it looks like. Saul killed them, and the text just says, the Gibeonites were not of the people of Israel, but of the remnant of the Amorites. Although the people of Israel had sworn to spare them, Saul had sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people. So that's exactly what Joshua could have done. That language is pretty significant. He sought to strike them down in his zeal for the people of Israel and Judah. Joshua, in his zeal for the people of Israel, could have done that too, but he didn't, because he had sworn with an oath that he would not do that. So even though he was I would have been fuming. I would have been so mad when I found out that they were they tricked me. They lied to me. They went through all that trouble just to look like they came from a far place and tricked me into making a peace and covenant with them. It would have been very easy for a soldier like Joshua, to do what Saul did. But he didn't. He held to his word. He was the bigger man. Probably the thing that Joshua, well, I don't even know if this is accurate. The thing that he's most known for is his famous speech at the end of his book. Joshua 24. Verse 15. In fact, it starts in verse 14. Really starts before that, but the speech does. But the famous part is, now therefore, fear Jehovah and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt. By the way, that is a key right there that we didn't know that they served. We might have assumed or speculate. But this is where Joshua explicitly says that the Israelites served false gods in Egypt and served Jehovah. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve Jehovah, choose this day whom you will serve. There's the big, the quotable part. Whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve Jehovah. Powerful commission, challenge to the people. Hey, you serve whoever you want. He's not saying it's okay. He's just saying, you choose who you're going to serve. I'll tell you who I'm going to serve. I'm going to serve Jehovah. Simple as that. And he had a very powerful, lasting example and influence over the people of Israel. And that's where we read in verse 31, Israel served Jehovah all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua. Then in Judges, it sort of repeats some of that, recaps some of that. And in chapter 2, it says, the people served Jehovah all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work that Jehovah had done for Israel. Then Joshua dies at 110 years old. They buried him. It says, and all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know Jehovah or the work that he had done for Israel. So that's what we talked about in class this morning, that whole concept. But notice the connection. As long as Joshua, and maybe even for some time after Joshua, people were faithful. But as soon as when Joshua was gone, everything fell apart. What does that say? As tragic as it is, what does it say about Joshua? He was a true leader. He was a great leader. He was a great man, a godly man. Nobody stepped up to fill Joshua's shoes. Joshua stepped up to fill Moses' shoes. Who's filling Joshua's shoes? Nobody did. And I don't think that's because there was nobody who could have at least tried. But Joshua died, and the spirituality of the nation just plummeted. Joe, do you have something?
But you know, prior, either Moses and or Joshua saw to it that Joseph's bones were returned to his family. So since it did not, the scripture doesn't tell us who was responsible for that. It's obviously the providence of God that the promise that Joseph asked for in the bones that was carried through even in his death.
Yeah. Did you say Joseph?
I thought I did do that.
I'm just making sure, because
Well, either Moses and
the bones of Joseph are finally mentioned again
right.
here at the end.
Somehow his bones got there, so somebody had to have been responsible for carrying out
Yeah.
the promise.
Joshua was obviously, I guess Moses was too, but they honored Joseph's request, and we didn't, you might think we're told earlier, and they took the bones of Joseph with them, but I don't think it ever says that. Not until here, when they finally get there, all of a sudden, oh, and as for the bones of Joseph, they brought them out of Egypt just like he asked, and so on. So there you go. So some lessons. I'll tell you lesson number 1, make sure an apostrophe doesn't sneak into the word lessons, because there's not an apostrophe in the word lessons. Don't know how they got there. That's why I didn't hear what Joe said, because I was thinking about that apostrophe. Number 1, Joshua had unshakable faith and in the power, word, and faithfulness of God. That's why everything he did, that was pretty much rooted in his faith in God's power, in God's word, and God's faithfulness. Number 2, when called, Joshua answered, and he delivered. Simple as that. He didn't make excuses like Moses did. No offense, Moses, sorry, but he didn't. It's a fact. At least we don't read about him. Number 3, godly jealousy is good, but humility is better. His motives were, he had good intentions, but Moses showed him that doesn't mean that it's a healthy thing. It doesn't mean that you should let it fester, but evaluate, just like Jesus did with John. Don't stop them. Yes, they weren't one of you with you in your inner circle or whatever, but is what they're doing bad? If it's not, then maybe you shouldn't have a problem with it. Joshua was a servant of Jehovah, and that's what we should be. Isn't that one of all the long list of things you could have under your name? Joshua 24:29 says, after these things, Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Jehovah, died, being 110 years old. What an epitaph, the servant of Jehovah. Can't get any better. He's not the assistant of Moses anymore, but he was always a servant of Jehovah. He's called that again in chapter 2, verse 8. The servant of Jehovah. And that's what we need to be. Whatever else we are, we need to be a servant of Jehovah. And may we all have a lasting example and influence like he did, so that after we're gone, the people we were around will still serve God. That reminds me of the way Abraham was described, the way God said he will be strong to lead even his children after him to follow me. That's a paraphrase, but Joshua was certainly one of them. Sadly, you can only do so much after you're dead. And it's not much. So even though, he had done all he could, that still wasn't enough, but it's still a credit to him that all he had to do was be alive, and his influence was so powerful, his example was so strong, people served God. The people served God under him. And we need to do that same thing. We need to help people follow God, and make sure, if possible, that there's something lined up for when we're not here anymore, because things can fall quickly after that. Not that Joshua failed to do that. He still had the elders that served with him and so on. So it doesn't really fall on Joshua, but the nation would have been better off if another Joshua had risen up to take his place in some capacity. He didn't need to conquer anymore, but still could have taught and led the people. Any other things? Thoughts? Anything about Joshua?
You said there wasn't anything left to conquer, but there wasn't there?
Well,
Like, not all of the tribes had complete.
yeah, they didn't fully kick the people out. They had the land now, but technically they didn't do it completely. The land they had, but the people were still there. So and they shouldn't have been. We'll just push them to the outskirts.
Some of them, they also made them like slaves kind of.
Yeah. God knows best. And he said, don't do that. It'll come back to bite you, and it did. Mm-hmm.
Whatever God asks us to do, He will supply us what we need to get it done. Early on in the book of Joshua, Joshua obviously believed when God told him, I will never leave you or forsake you. And where the land that your feet go on, I have already given to you. And so, just like Abraham, he believed it. God wouldn't lie. And that phrase is so close to what he told the apostles and us when in his ascension.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and lo, I am
I'll be with you always.
ever with you,
Mm-hmm.
even to the end of your age. Trusting and obeying is just everything.
Yep. The trust has got to come first. And if you trust in God for what he says, then the obedience will follow. If you don't, then you probably won't obey. The obedience probably won't follow because you don't truly believe in what God has said. But yeah, it didn't start there, but that was sort of the beginning of Joshua's part, his main part. Don't be afraid. Be strong and courageous. Go through with this. I'm going to be with you, right there with you. And, Moses even finally trusted in that, even though he tried to make those excuses, he still knew all along that God was there.
And their physical strength was preserved the whole time they were.
Yeah, God provided in ways that even he wouldn't have believed or imagined. And he always does. So, are we servants of him like Joshua was? That's the key. He's one of those examples to live up to, true to our word, and most importantly, true to God's word. That was his life.